Welcome, my friends, to the final recap video of the Airthings Masters. It has once again been an absolute pleasure making all of these for you. I will continue to do so through all of these tournaments, and there is an upcoming tournament in January, the Tata Steel and Over-the-Board tournament with Magnus Carlsen, Fabiano, Anish Giri all playing. I will cover that one as well. Before we kick things off today and determine the winner between Timur RADJABOV and Levon ARONIAN for first and second place, and MVL and DUBOV for third and fourth place, I want to show you this. This came out earlier today. Now this tour has a name, the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour, and there is going to be a live final, the esports kind of style final, as Magnus Carlsen tweeted out, in San Francisco in September. That is super cool. That is extremely exciting. Chess is evolving. There will be a live audience, just like there are for many other video games like League of Legends. Just amazing stuff to see. Okay, let's go. We begin between Levon ARONIAN and Timur RADJABOV, the first game, an Italian. No Evans Gambit. Sorry about that. So we get c3, knight f6, d3, castles, and Timur, right around this moment, starts firing early. He plays the move g5. This is kind of non-standard to push pawns in front of your king like this, but there are certain positions where sacrificing the knight here, which is a common idea sometimes to maintain this pin, isn't very good, because essentially what happens now is black plays the move king to g7, supporting the knight, and actually turns the attack around on you. So rather than sacrificing, Levon goes back, a5, a little bit more development, and really bishop b5 is kind of the critical moment, where Levon doesn't trade the bishops, instead he wants to trade the bishop for the knight. We get bishop to d7, because Timur doesn't want to damage his pawn structure, knight to e3, knight to e7, a4, c6. If you notice, nothing gets traded in this game until this move d4 on move 19, and e takes d4 from Timur. Finally something is traded. A little bit of tension is released in the position. We get bishop takes f4, g takes f4, and Levon, rather than playing a recapture here because his knight is hanging, or jumping the knight to f5, plays the extremely aggressive move, e5. This knight can be taken in two different ways. The pawn is hitting this and this. So Timur plays the best move, d takes e3, seeing through the mirage. Now look at this beauty. Queen to g6! What? The point is you can't take. That's what the pawn actually did. It had nothing to do with the knight. I mean, that's a bonus. There's queen to g6, and the computer doesn't realize how strong this is for like 10 seconds. It needs to like think a little bit and go, wait a minute, that's actually really good. After king to h8, he takes the pawn with check, the knight slides back to defend. Now bishop d3, very simple move. Levon's only got one thing on his mind, just like most men. Queen takes h7 mate. So we get pawn takes f2 check, king f1, take the rook, two queens on the board, and take. So right now, Timur is up 8 points of material, but the position is plus 3.5 for white. So an 11-point counterbalance for Levon. That's insane. The only move to prevent mate here is the move bishop to f5. If you play pawn to f5, that also looks good. There's a little rule in chess called en passant. I deliberately missay that word sometimes in my videos. By the way, I say en peasant, and I get people really confused. I know how to say it, don't worry. You go en passant and you win. This is not mate because you are guarded by the knights. You are just winning here. So bishop f5, he has to sack the bishop. Whoop! Spoilers. He has to sack the bishop. f6, ef6, queen f7. And in this position, Levon played a very interesting move, but he had a beauty here. He had an absolute beauty. He could have played the move rook takes c8 check, rook takes c8, because the queen has to stay guarding the knight. And now, in this position, there is a move for white which is winning. You can pause the video. I'll give you a few seconds to solve it. So for those of you who were able to figure out, congratulations, you're an extremely strong player. And for those of you that just want to enjoy the show, the move is b3. It's like, why? Why is the move b3? Well, the queen can't take, that's number one. But number two, you prevent queen to c4. That's what happens. You prevent queen c4. There's just no queen c4 check now. Because queen c4 was the only way that black was going to be able to move the queen without hanging a mate. It's b3 and it's over, because next move is this, and you hunt him down. A quiet move is the killer, but Levon in the game played rook to e6, the logic being that after rook takes e6, he was going to play knight g5. He's now down 9 points of material, but looks to be mating, except after this. Timur sacrifices his queen to save his king. It's very poetic, and the game just ends in a flurry of checks. And actually, Timur could have, if I'm not mistaken, played this position for a win. He chose to repeat moves. The computer was giving some really strange evaluation here, like -3, but saving the king was really, really difficult. And Timur just settles on a draw because it's better than losing this game, given the attack that he was under. And by the way, we will cover MVL DUBOV in the second part of this video, so if you made it this far, you want to jump ahead. The second game between Timur and Levon, Timur's now got the white pieces, right? So this one, a Grunfeld from Levon, which I don't think is a very common occurrence. I mean, Bishop G5, knight jumps to the middle, and we actually saw this with MVL. MVL played this many times with black. The point is that you try to like sacrifice your pawns like this to triple stack after Bishop G7 hitting this, Queen A5 hitting this and this. There's a lot of pressure there on the queen side, and well, white doesn't want to get involved in any of that, and instead Queen F3, Queen D7, a trade on C6, damaging black's pawn structure, knight F3, Bishop G7, and okay, here white can castle the king, but he just chooses to play knight E5, very deliberately trying to go after the C6 pawn, and Levon plays Bishop F5. This is a really interesting tactical defense of the C6 pawn, by the way. It's that if you take this pawn, I have this move, hitting G2 and the knight on C6, so we get F3, stopping that and trying to push, take, F6, bishop comes back, bishop jumps into D3, and now you glue in the bishop on D3, right? Where did we see this bishop before? Y'all remember? Hikaru had this bishop versus Levon a couple of days ago. No, like 5-6 days ago at this point. The point is that the bishop is nice, but if you just play around the bishop and just basically deny its existence, it has no role in the game. And that's exactly what happened in this game. Like, Levon tried to open up the center, but Timur just kept holding it together. Levon sacrificed the pawn. He's now a pawn down, but he's a little bit more active. His bishop is nice. His rooks are active. For King F2, the rook is coming. And what's going to happen when the rook shows up? You're just going to be a pawn down, so we get rook B5, take. A3, rook A8, rook A1. You're not supposed to win a position like this. Well, Timur's going to try. Rook A6, G4, King E6, H4, H5. Bishop E3, slides back. Bishop G5. How's he going to win this? I mean, like, you can't move. I mean, your rook is on the most passive possible square that it could be. King E6, King D5. All right, he brings his king. Brings his rook up one square. Slides his bishop behind the rook. King E6, Bishop B4. All right, rook B2, Bishop H7. I mean, like, nothing is happening, okay? I just want to end this game, but then Timur finally gets his moment. Levon plays the move E4. This pawn is hanging on H6, and, well, Levon decides that he's going to go for E4. So we get Bishop H6, EF3, King F3, and Levon goes B4. The point of B4 is that you cannot take with the A pawn, you lose your rook. You can take with this pawn, but that opens the door for the C3 pawn. Well, that looks scary, but Timur just brings his pieces back, and even though the pawn... this looks good, but the pawn is never going to promote. King B5, and Timur, look at this, A4, beautiful move. The point of A4 is that if you take me, what's going to happen is I'm going to trade my rook, and you'll never queen. And I have two passed pawns. So this game is just over. So he takes B4, but now A5, the same problem. You can never take... And rook F6 check, it doesn't matter, because I got pawns. I got pawns on that side, I got pawns on the other side. So I push that pawn all the way. Right, A7. You could take my bishop, I make a queen, you make a queen. But now the beautiful final touch of the position. Bam. And in this position, Levon resigns, because after queen takes B1, you have this, you X-ray, you win the game. And Timur RADJABOV takes a death grip on this match. He is now up 1-0 in the mini-match. And he's up 1.5-1/2, which means that Levon has to win both games today. He's got 2 more games. He's got to win them both. Then he wins the rapid portion of the day, ties the match overall, and they go to a blitz playoff. If they tie the match today 2-2, it's not good enough. And with that, we go to game 3. We get E4, E5. Knight F3, an Italian once again. Very similar position to last time, although this time the queen is a little bit closer. And again, the big moment. Are we going to see G5 from Timur? Yes. Are we going to see a sacrifice? No. We get this. Knight back to E7, knight out to C4, bishop slides out of danger, knight goes back to the middle to hit everybody, C6. Point of C6 is you want to play D5 in the future. Or you want to play B5 in the future. And I can guarantee you one of these two moves happens because I've seen the game, not because I'm a genius. See? B5. c4, bishop takes c3, rook e3, and knight g6. And now it is time for Timur to do some hippity-hoppity here with his horses. He's going knight g6, knight h5 to put some pressure on this side of the board. Rook c1, and knight jumps into f4, hitting everything. Hitting this, hitting this, hitting this. Levon plays d4. Look at this. Look at this. Have you ever seen 5 pawns on the 4th rank like this? I've not. I mean, I don't remember the last time I've seen that. Queen f6. No one's taking anybody, by the way. It's like a standoff. Rook d1, king g7. Finally, bam, bam. Okay, phew. Chop, chop. Okay, boom. Things have cleared out. The b5 pawn is a little bit under pressure, but it's impossible to attack unless you play the move queen to c6. Are you going to go do that? You're going to go into your opponent's territory? Yes. And when the rook goes to defend, the queen's going to continue to overstay her welcome. The queen stays in the territory, keeping an eye on everybody trying to fight, you know? Like the drunk guy at the bar. All right, let's go. I'm going to fight everybody, right? Rook d8, queen slides out to g4. Now the queen has rerouted itself to put pressure on the other side. Now we're around here. The problem is that now you got a rook hit and a queen hit. So Timur nerfs Levon's queen. Now the rook goes to take the open file, and Timur's right on time with rook a8. Timur throughout this match felt like he was right on time with his defenses and right on time with his attacking moves. It was crazy. Every time you had the guy in a spot where you thought you were going to get him, he was defending. Anytime you made a mistake and you let him overtake you, he would overtake you. And he makes it so difficult for Levon in this game. h5, knight e7, rook d7, rook to a4, hitting the b4 pawn. Knight takes e5, king takes e5, sacrificing the knight, removing the king from guarding the black knight. But now king to f6, rook e8, rook takes b4. Forcing Levon to go here. It's rook and 4 versus rook and 4. Timur's pawns are a little bit split. Let's see if Levon can win this endgame. Rook b2, king slides out. Now the pawn goes. Now the pawn goes. Pawn is going. So rook b8, king e5. Rook to b6, rook to b1. King comes up to g4 to hit the pawn on f4, but it's never crossing. And now rook g1. And the truth is, if you go back, I go back. If you take, I'm going to take you. So we get rook to b5 check. Rook takes b3, and king takes f4. Now Levon is pawn up. But rook to g5. Check. e5. Pawn falls. Rook b6. Right on time. Rook f5 check. h5, an extra move there. And the pawn is gone. And now Timur is up a pawn. And a few short moves later, they trade it off, king versus king. The game ends in a draw. And the Airthings Masters has a champion. It is over. Because even if Levon were to win the final rapid game, he would not win the match today. Levon has been eliminated in the second place spot, and congratulations to Timur, but don't go anywhere, because we still have a semifinal match. Where are you going? Are you gonna leave? We got 2 dudes here fighting for $25,000. Don't go anywhere. Yesterday, the match between Daniel Dubov and MVL, whoop, spoiled that a little bit. You don't know who won that game. Yesterday, the match between Daniel Dubov and MVL was a crazy one. Daniel started out 2-0. MVL then won the last 2 games in positions he had no business winning. So let's see what happens today. Daniil, we kick things off with another Sicilian. Bishop b5, knight d7. Castles a6, bishop d3. Knight f6, c3, b5. And this one, I mean, watch. There's just an explosion. We get a4, bishop b7. Take, 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 take. Knight a3, take, 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 take. Queen b7. c4, e6, d3. Knight goes back. And d4. I mean, even before, let's just say this. The first 14 moves of this game, there's no more rooks. The whole queen side looks like the detonation of a bomb of some sort. d4 opening the center. Why is this a good move for Dubov? He's castled. MVL's king is still stuck in the center, so it's good to open up the position with a move like d4. MVL's plays bishop e7, d5, e5. He doesn't want the center open. But one pawn move is all Dubov needs to get to work. He's a crafty man. f5 is a nice juicy square. So we go here. So that forces g6 because he doesn't want this. This move weakens that square. Now we get this move. Uh-oh. How you ever castling? Bishop slides back to f8. And in this position, Daniel Dubov missed one of the most beautiful moves I've ever seen. This bishop is protecting this. And essentially the point here of MVL is that if you take me and I take, I am now no longer blundering a fork. See, that's the difference. The king is not there anymore, and I take this and I'm completely fine. And he's not wrong. Bishop f8, bishop takes f8, that is exactly what is going to happen, unless you play the absolutely beautiful Oh, it looks like a mouse slip. If you take, it's a fork, and I hit this, and this is a levy. So what, dude? I just go here, and yeah, but now I take the knight. this and the move queen b3. Say, Levy, what's so good about that? The threat of this move is to take this pawn because, for example, you lose the knight, but you have a discovered attack on the queen. So by using this tactic, you would win a queen. And if, let's say, the other person doesn't fall for that and plays this, now your rook joins the attack, and black is dead. You cannot stop this attack from happening. In fact, Daniil missed it twice. He could have played it here too, but he does this, and then he trades, and suddenly MVL's defending. He continues to try to push on that side of the board, bringing his pawns up, right? A little bit later, f5. But MVL is now a pawn up. He plants the knight on d3, and he plays this move h6. After gh6, rook h8, the rook is about to break out. The pawns they've been stopped. We get queen g5, knight e5, and wait a second. Who's attacking who? Who is attacking who? Wait a second. Knight c7, rook takes h6, rook a8. You sacrifice because there was a look at this. He sacks the queen because if it was taken, rook takes h4, and you cannot take because of a fork. MVL, on the verge of death in this game, turns around and attack on his opponent. 2 knights and a queen, hunting down the king. He hunts, he checks. Look at this move. Oh, if you take it, I fork you and I win the queen. MVL is now 3 pawns up. And that's it. I mean, he slowly converted the endgame, and while this is the position that you saw in the very end, MVL wins again. What? This is now 3 straight games that MVL has made a comeback against Daniil Dubov. It's unbelievable. I've never seen something like this. Like, this match is so crazy. Daniil jumps out to these early leads, and MVL, resilient, hangs in there and defends for all his life. And so we move to their second match of the day. This one began with e4, e5. It was an Italian. It was a very similar game to one that they had yesterday, right? Very similar structure, actually. If you watched yesterday's recap, the position looked quite similar to this. Literally this position. You say, Levy, why didn't you go through those first 16 moves? They've already played 3 games that look basically identical, just the only difference is in this game, MVL has advanced his pawns on the queen side. He's pushing his pawns on the queen side, not because he thinks that he can sneak a pawn through and make a queen and Daniil won't notice. He's using these pawns as barriers, as thorns, to not let this knight into the position, to not let the pawns come forward, to not let this knight into the position. That's what he's doing. But Daniil has opened up lines of attack to his king, and then he attacks in the center as well, and attacks on that side and plays h5. So Daniil has a very serious game plan here. The thing is, if his attack does not work, MVL has long-term space advantage. So we get f3, h4, and now probably the ugliest knight move in the world, but a necessity to reroute it back to the middle. Rook takes f3. This is just a free pawn. If you take it with the queen, you lose a queen. If you take it with the pawn, you lose a king. So that, see, I wish this was a legal move just so you could get punished, but we get knight to g4, rook goes back, a trade occurs, and even though Dubov is a pawn up, it's not so easy here. Like, he is a pawn up, and in theory should be better, but he sacrifices the h-pawn, he damages MVL's structure, brings in his queen, his bishop and his knight, but MVL is able to trade, bring his king, pawn trade in the middle, and MVL was able to stabilize the game. A few trades later, this actually was a very interesting endgame. Around this point, Daniil could have played a really cool pawn sacrifice. Rather than defending this, he could just play a5. The point is that if you take, now the pawn is trying to sneak through. This pawn will be a permanent distraction for the white position. The queen will have to monitor its movement, and while that is occurring, black can try to sneak in here and hit the king. But we got king h7 again. It's move 40, both players a bit low on time, and here Daniil's king goes for a walk. But the game does end in a repetition of moves. Not the most boring draw, though. You can't really complain when something like this happens. It is now 1.5 to half. We go to the third game. This one, once again, nothing surprising. It's a Sicilian with bishop b5, and this kind of a structure with the 2 pawns in the middle and d4. This is a structure known as the Maroczy structure. If you haven't seen my video about pawn structures, you should go watch my video about pawn structures. It's one of the oldest structures in the Sicilian. The point is that you set up a clamp on the middle. You don't have a light squared bishop. Sometimes you do. In this case, you don't. And since you don't have a light squared bishop, you put all your pawns on light squares to occupy the light squared complex while your dark squared bishop exists. And you can even do something like this. And it's really difficult in these kinds of positions to create play. It's just really not easy. And, well, MVL is trying to do it on this side of the board. It's not easy for black, I should say, because you have such a drastic lack of space. H3, knight goes back to the middle. There was a lot of maneuvering and shuffling, and this perhaps was the most curious decision, DUBOV volunteering himself for this damage of the pawn structure, because sometimes when you damage your structure in an unorthodox manner, like this one, you allow yourself certain things. And one of the things that you allow yourself is open lines and planting a knight on square, for example, that you might not have been able to if the structure stayed more natural, right? So e6, queen f2, and h5 again. Again, it wouldn't be a game between GMs if an h-pawn didn't go to h5 or h4. We get queen all the way back to honestly, I don't even know how to explain this move. It just looks cool. So that's your explanation. Rook d7, rook d1, rook d8. A big battle for the d6 pawn, which the queen literally just abandoned for reasons I don't fully understand. And now c5. Nice move. Anytime you have a pin like this on a rook defending, you can play the move c5, you can hit the structure there, and weaken it considerably. So d5, it's the only way. Yeah, the problem is this pawn can't actually take anything, which means you can play knight c4. Very nice move. Cannot be taken. Rook is taken. The knight now jumps in. And, well, queen h4. Queen comes out. Doesn't want to be traded. You don't want to trade queens if it feels like you're the one attacking, and he is attacking. g4. And here, MVL blundered. He blundered the move, rook d4. Pinning the pawn to the queen. Queen has to go back, hg4, and all of a sudden, it starts falling apart. b4, there are 3 pawns just about to march down the board, so MVL sacks the rook. b5, a4, take, and that's it. Danil spends the rest of this game just investing in his b-pawn. That is what you have to do in this endgame. It's a balance between pushing your b-pawn and bringing your king and making sure the opponent cannot create counterplay. Look at this move. Look at that move. At the right moment, he sacrifices his rook. Even in endgames, the man has flair. The point is that after rook to b8, king c7, the pawn's just going. You can't stop the pawn. The king is not close enough. The game is over. So MVL doesn't take the rook. And the pawn finally goes. Rook a8, e5, and rook c1. And here MVL resigned because if you go check, I bring the king to this square, and the pawn is just promoting. Very instructive endgame. How to play with a material balance and a material advantage with a passed pawn. Both rooks and the king go fully invested into the pawn, and it makes you win the game. And that's it. Now it comes down to either this final rapid game or the blitz. If they draw this next game, there is going to be blitz. If one of them wins, they win 3rd place, and they win $25,000. And that is why you stick around till the end of Gothamchess recaps, because I just want to tell you that I love you, and you're amazing. And we are growing as a community, and I'm so excited to continue making videos for all of you, and you never know when I'll compliment the viewers, so that's why you stick around in these videos. So, wish you all the best. Know many people taking final exams right now, and hope you're all doing okay. So, bishop b5, it's a Spanish from DUBOV, and bishop c5. This is, b5 and bishop c5 is a very aggressive Spanish. Normally the bishop goes back to e7. This is more classical. c3, d6, and this is really why it's dangerous, because white's idea in the Spanish is to delay the traditional move knight to c3, although that is also possible, and then c3, d4 attacks the center, and so does a4, and you just kind of never really get stabilized. You know, you get all this pawn advancement. Black is completely fine, but these bishops don't really, they don't really scare anybody for now. Rook e1, knight to e7. DUBOV trying to activate one of the bishops. We get bishop c2, castles, knight d2, knight g6. These knights are coming. They want to go knight f4, they want to go knight h5, knight f1, rook e8, and now the first trade and the move c5. This is a big decision. Does MVL take? Does he push? Does he defend? He chooses to push, but that means that DUBOV can also activate his bishop. Now we get the move b4 from MVL, which really is just designed to stop this from happening. It's kind of funny that b4, b3 is such a serious threat in this position. So he plays b4, there is en passant, but now black is not really pressuring you with the c and the b pawns. Knight goes back to d7, and the moment that Daniil retreats, MVL says, okay, knight to f5. Beautiful move, hitting this, maybe a bishop here in the future. So knight goes to e5. Now, if I ask you a question here, which of black's pieces is the most annoying and, like, menacing and you don't like very much? If you answered bishop on a7, you are a genius. It's staring down the entire board. So what do? You trade it. And you've now improved your position because black doesn't have that bishop anymore. Bishop to c8 and knight to d4, activating the knight. Queen f6. And Dubov trades his not-so-great bishop for a very active knight. Of course, it is replaced, actually not with the knight. It's replaced with a pawn, but it's still replaced with something taking away squares in the opponent's position. Knight goes to h4, knight goes to c6. So both sides doing what they want. MVL sacrificing a pawn on f5, plays rook takes e5, taking the knight. Pawn takes, and now, what is the most aggressive move in this position for MVL? If you said rook to c8 check, you're a little bit too excited because you lose a rook. But the queen is also worth a lot, and rook c8, queen d8. Rook c6, queen d8. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this final lesson of this video is a mini lesson in not being greedy. In this position, white can play the move rook takes pawn. And quite likely it is to happen. But if you rush with this move, what's going to happen is potentially I will start targeting your rook with moves like queen c8. Now, of course, on queen c8, you do have this. But then I can go queen d7, and I can play rook a8, and I can try to win your a5 pawn while I've removed your rook. I have pressure on your center as well. He stays patient for one move because of how active his rook is, and plays d6. And suddenly, this protected pass pawn, as we saw in the last endgame, this bishop is now activated. He does win the pawn, but only after this knight has stopped seeing this pawn, right? He goes rook a6. He welcomes a trade of his bishop for the knight. He wins the f7 pawn by maneuvering the rook to f7 to target it with the bishop. And now, after queen takes d6, there is one and only one move in this position which wins the game for white. It is not a tactic. It is not some flashy move. It is the move, and he finds it. Queen to c4. Which looks insane, because it's like, wait a second, you're gonna let me go b3? You're just gonna let me push the pawn? Well, the point of queen c4 is that it actually stops the move b3. How? The back rank. That's why it's so important to know about back rank checkmates. The rook protects the back rank, and the rook also protects this. So what do? You don't take, because there's no mate with the rook. You play here. Rook b7. And if you push, if you play b2, I just take. It doesn't matter. You don't take the rook because the queen is protecting. And now if this, it's mate. It's just mate. I mean, the queen can block, you take the queen, it's game over. Unbelievable. Queen c4 prevents b3 with rook b7. Unreal defense. So black plays h6, but now a6. And now you're not fast enough. You can push, but I still have rook to b7. Protected by the pawn. If this, push, oh, you are not fast enough. I have check, I have this, and I queen, and I'm guarded, and I hit this, and I hit this. And you can go check, and king to h2, and you can make 4 queens on the board, and it does not matter, because after queen to g8, king here, check, here I have check, here I have check, here I have check, here, and h4 mate. Oh, I mean, I would have loved if this happened, but it didn't. But it would have been, I should have just lied. I should have just said that's what happened. Instead, Dubov played this, and the endgame is just losing. What happens after rook b8 check, king h7, queen g8, king is hunted out. You give a lot of checks. You take, you check, you check. That's it. The king's been cut off. And rook b5 check. Daniil Dubov resigned. Maxime Vacher-Lagrave is the 3rd place finisher of the Airthings Masters. Congratulations to all these players. RADJABOV taking home $60,000. ARONIAN taking home $45,000. MVL $25,000. And Daniil $15,000. And that ends 9 days of recap videos. I am excited because I'm going to keep the ball rolling. I will now upload a lot of content over the course of the next week. Chess instruction. I recently made a post, community post. If you're watching very much in the future, it won't exist anymore. But respond to that post, please. I want to know what you all want me to do. You could leave a comment on this video. I would appreciate it very much. Let me know your thoughts on all these recaps, things you like, things I could maybe do better. Be nice, be respectful, and we're going to keep on rolling. Much love to you all. It's been a pleasure covering these, and I look forward to making recap videos of the Tata Steel that's coming up later in January.